I opened the door and immediately knew something was off. 2 police officers stood on my doorstep, demanding I remove my security cameras, but their badges looked too new and their confidence felt forced. The moment I pulled out my phone and stated my job title, their faces turned pale, and within seconds they bolted. But they didn't get far. What happened next was something they never saw coming. But let's start from the beginning. David Williams, a district attorney, didn't like unannounced visits, especially when they came in the form of 2 men standing on his doorstep in police uniforms, but failing to inspire trust. When he opened the door, he was met with 2 distinct expressions. The first belonged to a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a heavy, assessing gaze. The second, a shorter man with a thick mustache and a smug grin, as if he already knew this encounter would go in his favor. Badges hung from both their chests. They looked legitimate, shiny, engraved with numbers. But something was off. Too new, too clean, too perfect, as if they had just been taken out of the packaging. "Mr. Williams?" The mustached man squinted slightly, as if testing how easily this man could be intimidated. David crossed his arms over his chest. "Yes," he replied evenly. "We've received reports that you installed surveillance cameras on your property without HOA approval. That's a violation," the mustached man said, flipping open a notepad with a movement that felt more theatrical than official. "You need to take them down, or we'll be forced to issue a fine." David didn't answer right away. He blinked slowly, giving himself a moment to process. Cameras? A violation? He knew the law too well to believe such nonsense. He had installed his cameras legally, well within his rights, and no one could demand their removal without an official order. "On what grounds?" he asked, his voice calm, but irritation already simmering beneath the surface. "Regulations," the broad-shouldered man replied, pulling out a notepad and opening it as if it contained important documents. But David saw it instantly. The pages were blank. No stamps, no official notices. They weren't even trying to be convincing. David exhaled slowly. He knew exactly what he was dealing with. These men weren't real police officers. They were scammers, using a familiar tactic: intimidate, create the illusion of authority, and demand a fine in cash. They were counting on fear, on compliance. But today, they had picked the wrong man. David Williams didn't move, but the air between him and the 2 officers grew increasingly tense. He crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze cold and analytical, as if he wasn't just looking at them, he was dissecting their lies piece by piece. "All right," he said, his voice calm, but beneath that calmness was a dangerous steel. "Then let's do this by the book. State your name, rank, and badge number." The bald man blinked. For a brief second his face froze, clearly scrambling for an answer. Then, pulling himself together, he forced out, "Officer Marshall." "And you?" David slowly turned to the mustached one, studying his reaction. "Officer Rodriguez," the man replied, though his voice lacked confidence. He was trying to sound firm, but every word carried an underlying tension. David gave a slow nod, letting the pause stretch before reaching into his pocket and pulling out his phone. With a tap, the red recording light blinked to life. "Perfect," he said, his tone almost lazy. The camera pointed directly at them. "So, Officers Marshall and Rodriguez," he repeated their names with deliberate clarity, making them sound as official as possible. "You're claiming that my security cameras were installed illegally and demanding their removal. Do you have an official court order?" Immediate reaction. Marshall tensed even further, his broad shoulders twitching slightly as if bracing for something unpleasant. Rodriguez, on the other hand, averted his gaze, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Why are you recording?" Rodriguez's voice turned sharp, almost gruff. The tone of a man realizing control was slipping through his fingers. David didn't even blink. "Because what you're doing," he said coldly, is a crime. Rodriguez swallowed hard. Impersonating a police officer and attempted extortion, David continued, his voice so steady and emotionless that it was even more unsettling. Silence. Rodriguez licked his lips nervously, clearly scrambling for a way out. Look, mister, let's not make this a big deal. He tried to smile, but it came out as more of a strained grimace. Just take down the cameras, and we'll forget about this. David took a step forward, not threatening, not aggressive, just a step, but it was enough to make the air grow heavier. That, his voice remained even, but now carried an unmistakable icy warning, is called intimidation. He let that sink in for a second before delivering the final blow. And before you continue, you should know, I'm a district attorney. The silence that followed was almost ominous. Rodriguez paled. His smug demeanor vanished, leaving only fear. Marshall stiffened, his fingers curling into fists. Now they knew they were in serious trouble. Marshall shot a quick glance at Rodriguez, a fleeting, barely perceptible look, but David caught it instantly. He knew that look too well. He had seen it in the eyes of defendants hundreds of times. It was the look of a man who realized there was no way out. Rodriguez swallowed hard, his confidence crumbling like a house of cards. We just wanted to handle this amicably, he muttered, but the arrogance was gone from his voice. David stepped forward. Handle it amicably? His voice was calm, but there was steel in it. Then stay. He raised his hand and pressed the call button. Click. Dial tone. Marshall flinched, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal. No, wait! Rodriguez took a step back, but quickly hesitated. Hey, let's not take it that far. His voice shook, but he desperately tried to keep his composure. David didn't even blink. You already did. A heavy silence settled between them. Marshall cursed under his breath and jerked his hand. His notebook, full of fines, fell to the ground with a dull thud, pages scattering across the pavement. He didn't bother picking it up. He simply turned on his heel and marched toward the car, his fists clenched. Rodriguez hesitated for a split second, torn between panic and the need to save face, but then he bolted after his partner. Stop! David's sharp command sliced through the air, but they were already running. They thought they could escape, but they didn't make it far. From around the corner, as if fate itself had intervened, a patrol car appeared. Red and blue lights flashed, flooding the street in an ominous glow. Officer! David's voice cracked through the air like a whip. He raised his hand sharply, pointing at the fleeing fraudsters. These two impersonated police officers and were extorting money. The real patrol officer reacted instantly. Stop! Hands up! His voice boomed like thunder, authoritative, unquestionable, the kind of command that people obey on instinct. Marshall froze as if he had been struck by lightning. He tried to stop too abruptly. His legs couldn't hold his weight, and he nearly collapsed, flailing his arms for balance. Rodriguez, on the other hand, hesitated for a second, his instincts still screaming, "Run!" But the moment he saw the officer yank out a pair of handcuffs, his resolve shattered. "This is a mistake. We were just—" But words meant nothing now. Click. Steel cuffs snapped shut around Marshall's wrists. Click. Rodriguez flinched as the cold metal locked around his own hands. Now they were trapped. A brief, loaded silence hung in the air. David stood still, watching as the fraudsters were shoved into the patrol car. He had witnessed this moment thousands of times in courtrooms, but this time it was happening right in front of him. A storm of emotions flickered in their eyes, panic, fear, frustration, anger. But beneath all of it, lurking in the depths, was something colder, something absolute. Dread. They wouldn't get out of this. And David knew the weight of that realization was crashing down on them right now, But he felt no gloating satisfaction. He felt justice. This day could have ended differently, but it ended right. Justice was served.